Star Wars Young Jedi Knights. Jedi Under Siege. Chapter 20. As he plodded ahead, Zeke could barely see 2 meters in front of himself in the murk of Yavin Forest's familiar jungle. Dense underbrush tore his hair and cape, and his breath came in ragged gasps. His ponytail had come completely, entirely undone. Still, Zeke pushed on. Occasionally, he glanced back over his shoulder to see if any of Skywalker's Jedi trainees were pursuing him. He sensed no one following, but could he be sure? Who knows, he thought. They might have light side tricks he never heard of, ways to keep him from sensing their presence. He had seen many unexpected things today, strange things, horrible things. It hardly mattered that the winding path ahead was uncertain and difficult to see. He would have been blind to it anyway. His mind was partially unnumbed by the sights his eyes had witnessed today: destruction, terror, failure, death. Zeke's foot slipped on a patch of moldy, damp leaves, and he went down on one knee. Grabbing a low branch, he pulled himself back to his feet and then stood disoriented for a moment. Which direction had he been heading? He knew he was going forward towards something, but he couldn't quite remember what. Finally, some unreasoned part of him remembered, and he set off again. Suddenly, just ahead of him, a knee-high rodent sprang from the underbrush, its claws extended. Zeke's Jedi instincts automatically took over. In one smooth movement, Zeke withdrew his lightsaber and drew himself sideways of the creature's path. His cheek split open as it smashed against the purplish-brown trunk of the Musashi tree. His thumb pressed the lightsaber's ignition stud at the same moment. Before Zeke could even blink to breathe, the blood-red blade sprang forth and sliced through the rodent in mid-leap. With a shriek that broke off abruptly, 2 smoking halves of the creature fell to the forest floor. It reminded him of how he had killed Timothy Kai's student Villas in the zero-gravity arena on the Shadow Academy station. Not a memory that comforted him. Blood trickled down from the cut on Zeke's cheek, but the pain was too distant, too far away for him to feel. His ability with the Force had protected him just now. After all, he was a Dark Jedi, but what about his companions from the Second Imperium? What of their powers? Why had it all gone wrong? For today he had seen his Dark Jedi, one after another, lose their battles or be captured by Skywalker's trainees. He had a terrible suspicion that only he remained. Oh, the dark side had its victories. The Commando Orvac had obviously succeeded in destroying the shield generator and no doubt moved to the next step of his mission. There had been other times during the day when Zeke felt the Shadow Academy's trainees achieved surges of victory, but each victory had been short-lived. Brackus, Timothy Kai, he and his companions all had been so certain of a quick, decisive triumph. With their training in the dark side, they should have no problem, Zeke told himself. Wasn't that what Brackus had taught? A few minutes later, Zeke emerged from this darkness into a broad clearing where the wide river ran sluggishly between the trees. His spirits rising ever so slightly, Zeke walked to the edge of the river and stopped to take a drink. Despite the green color of the water, his reflection was clear. Sunken emerald eyes, shadowed with dark circles, gazed back at him from the rippling surface. Only the barest spark of his former confidence still lurked in his expression. Tangles of filthy dark hair framed a face as pale as the moon of his home planet Eneth. Blood still oozed from the wound on his face, contrasting nicely with the purple bruises that surrounded it. It made him think of Brackus and his finely chiseled features. A wail of despair echoed in the young man's head, knocking him to his hands and knees in the mud in the river. In a futile gesture, Zeke pressed his muddy hands over his ears. "Brackus!" he screamed. "What went wrong?" Hardly understanding what was happening, Zeke turned his face upward toward the sky. For a split second, he recognized the spiked ring of the Shadow Academy in low orbit above the jungle moon. Then, without warning, the space station bloomed into a fireball high above him. Zeke's jaw went slack at the sight. He had not thought it possible to feel any more pain, but he had been wrong. Brackus, the name whispered in Zeke's mind. He knew the master would have been aboard the Shadow Academy when it blew up. He could feel it. He had felt his teacher's despair, his mind crying out. The silvery-robed Jedi had taken Zeke in when the young man had no hope of future and no purpose. Brackus had trained Zeke, given him purpose, direction, position, and skills to be proud of. At the Shadow Academy, Zeke had belonged. He had been its darkest night. Now what was left for him? All that he had trained for and lived for was gone. Pride, comrades, future, all gone. There was no doubt in Zeke's mind that the Second Imperium had been decisively defeated today, and now his mentor, the only man who ever believed in Zeke, was dead. No, not the only man who ever believed in Zeke. A fresh wave of anguish washed over Zeke at the thought. Old Peckham had always believed in him too. Zeke had promised never to do anything to hurt or disappoint the old spacer. Today, though, he had fought on the side of Peckham's enemies. Despite all the faults that Zeke had acknowledged he had never in his life lied to old Peckham. Anger jolted through him, at himself, at having been forced to fight his friend, at having been forced to take such terrible choices. His muscles tightened at the tension inside. It seemed unbearable. With a cry of anguish, he plunged his fingers deep into the mud. It was dark, slippery, treacherous. Yet this is what he had chosen, the darkness. Today he had stood and watched as his comrades blasted the lightning rod out of the skies. For all he knew, the only other man who ever believed in him might also now be dead. Zeke's hands clenched in the ooze, and he jerked up fistfuls of mud and smeared it on his face. The mud stung his cut. Now he could feel the pain again, but he didn't care. He deserved it. He had failed them all. Brackus, the other dark warriors, old Peckham himself. Silent tears dropped unheeded from his eyes as he scooped up more mud and rubbed it in his hands, his forearms, his neck. Dark mud. This is what he had become. Darkness. He had chosen it, immersed himself in it. He was stained with it. There could be no turning back for Zeke anymore. He had made his choices, and he was what he was, a dark Jedi. That could not change now. Though his comrades were defeated or captured and Brackus dead, Zeke would never be able to cleanse himself for as long as he lived, however long that might be. Not even Jaina and Jason, if they were still alive, would be able to forgive him. Considering the space battles above, the destruction of the Shadow Academy, the attacks here on the ground, Zeke himself was responsible for 200 or more deaths today. Maybe even Peckham's. The twins would know that. They had never believed Zeke's decision to join the Shadow Academy was the right one. Had never believed that he could become anything. But he had made his choice, and he had done his best. He had even warned Jaina and Kashyyyk not to return to Yavin 4, hoping to keep her away from fighting, though he doubted she had listened. He pushed himself to his feet and caught sight of his reflection again in the slow-moving water. His once beautiful cape hung in tatters around his shoulders, its scarlet lining shredded. Mud covered his skin. The sunken emerald eyes were now bleak and hopeless. But he wasn't finished yet. It might not matter anymore what happened to him, but he still had choices. He would show the twins what he was made of. Turning, he headed along the riverbank toward the great temple. Zeke still had one card left to play.